It began with hope and ended in ice. The year was 1845. Britain stood as the most powerful empire on Earth. Its navy ruled the seas. Its explorers had mapped half the world, and its people believed there were no mysteries left that a British ship could not conquer. But there was still one frontier, a frozen void at the top of the world. The Northwest Passage, a mythical sea route that was said to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic ice. For centuries, explorers had searched for it, and all had failed. Then came Sir John Franklin, a seasoned explorer and naval officer, chosen to succeed where others had perished. At 60 years old, he was not a young man, but in him burned the pride of an empire and the stubborn faith of a generation that believed British courage could overcome nature itself. In the summer of 1845, Franklin set sail with two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, both fitted with the latest technology of the age, steam engines, reinforced iron hulls, and supplies to last for 3 full years. On board were 129 men, sailors, officers, and scientists, all proud to be part of the greatest Arctic mission in history. The newspapers called it the Expedition of Destiny. The Queen herself waved them farewell. No one could have imagined that they were sailing not toward glory, but toward extinction. The ships were last seen by whalers near Greenland's coast in late July 1845, 2 dark silhouettes vanishing into a horizon of fog and ice. After that, nothing. Months turned into years. The families waited for letters that never came. The Admiralty remained silent, confident that Franklin's discipline would prevail. But the Arctic is not a place that forgives pride. By 1848, when no word had come, Britain began to worry. Search parties were sent. First one, then another, then a dozen more. Each came back with the same answer. No trace. The ships had simply disappeared. Rumors spread. Whispers that Franklin's men had starved, gone mad, or turned on one another. But no one knew. For the Victorians, it was unthinkable. The idea that the empire's finest could vanish without a trace was a wound to national pride. For the families, it was worse. Wives wore black for years, listening to the ticking of clocks that counted only silence. The Arctic became a grave without tombstones. Then came Lady Jane Franklin, Sir John's wife, a woman of relentless will. She refused to accept the official silence. If the Admiralty would not find her husband, she would do it herself. She used her fortune, her social power, and the press to keep the world's attention fixed on the frozen North. Between 1848 and 1859, more than 40 expeditions searched the Arctic from Britain, America, and even Russia, all trying to solve the riddle of Franklin's fate. And then, the ice began to speak. In 1850, the first real clues appeared. On a desolate island called Beachy, there, searchers found 3 graves, perfectly preserved in the permafrost, each marked with a wooden cross and the name of a crewman. John Torrington, William Braine, and John Hartnell. Their bodies were eerily intact, faces still pale beneath the glass of ice. It was as if time itself had stopped. Nearby lay empty food tins, boots, buttons. Ordinary things frozen in a world beyond reason. But no sign of the ships. The mystery deepened. Each year, new expeditions followed, each finding fragments of the truth. A torn piece of clothing, a silver spoon engraved with initials, and sometimes a bone, human, cracked open as if to reach the marrow. The truth was darker than anyone had imagined. When finally a written note was discovered in 1859, it told the first half of the story. The Erebus and Terror had become trapped in thick ice near King William Island in September 1846, and they never broke free. Franklin had died the following year. The survivors, numbering barely 100, abandoned the ships in April 1848 and began to march south across the barren Arctic wasteland. Hoping to reach safety, they never did. Their tracks ended in silence, scattered bones along a trail of despair. For over a century, the Franklin expedition haunted Britain's imagination. Books were written, poems sung, statues raised, but the truth remained buried under the ice. No one knew where the ships lay, or how the men truly died, until the 21st century, when the Arctic finally surrendered its ghosts. In 2014, HMS Erebus was found, perfectly preserved under 36 feet of icy water. 2 years later, the HMS Terror was discovered, astonishingly intact, with plates still stacked in the galley, and boots still resting beside the beds, as if the crew had simply gone to sleep. But the mystery didn't end there, it only deepened. When the frozen sea grips you, it never lets go. Those who tried to follow Franklin's footsteps soon realized that the Arctic was not just a landscape, it was a living trap. Endless white stretched in every direction. No sound but the moan of the wind and the groan of shifting ice. As if the earth itself was breathing in pain. The men of the Franklin expedition had faced this silence for months. Their ships, Erebus and Terror, locked in ice thicker than stone, became prisons of wood and iron. Every sunrise looked the same, a pale circle that never warmed the skin. At first, discipline held strong. They kept journals, held prayers, and clung to the belief that the thaw would come in spring. But spring never came. Food supplies dwindled. The tinned meat, their modern miracle, turned out to be poison. The lead solder that sealed the cans had leached into the food, slowly filling their bodies with a silent toxin. Their minds grew foggy, their hands trembled, their skin turned gray. The Arctic had claimed them from within. The survivors, numbering barely 100, abandoned the ships in April 1848 and began to march south across the barren Arctic wasteland. Hoping to reach safety, they never did. Their tracks ended in silence, scattered bones along a trail of despair. For over a century, the Franklin expedition haunted Britain's imagination. Books were written, poems sung, statues raised, but the truth remained buried under the ice. No one knew where the ships lay or how the men truly died. Until the 21st century, when the Arctic finally surrendered its ghosts. In 2014, HMS Erebus was found, perfectly preserved under 36 feet of icy water. 2 years later, the HMS Terror was discovered, astonishingly intact, with plates still stacked in the galley, and boots still resting beside the beds, as if the crew had simply gone to sleep. But the mystery didn't end there, it only deepened. When the frozen sea grips you, it never lets go. Those who tried to follow Franklin's footsteps soon realized that the Arctic was not just a landscape, it was a living trap. Endless white stretched in every direction. No sound but the moan of the wind and the groan of shifting ice. As if the earth itself was breathing in pain. The men of the Franklin expedition had faced this silence for months. Their ships, Erebus and Terror, locked in ice thicker than stone, became prisons of wood and iron. Every sunrise looked the same, a pale circle that never warmed the skin. At first, discipline held strong. They kept journals, held prayers, and clung to the belief that the thaw would come in spring. But spring never came. Food supplies dwindled. The tinned meat, their modern miracle, turned out to be poison. The lead solder that sealed the cans had leached into the food, slowly filling their bodies with a silent toxin. Their minds grew foggy, their hands trembled, their skin turned gray. The Arctic had claimed them from within. Yet even in this horror, there was a strange beauty, a tragic defiance that kept them walking into the cold. They left messages, journals, and personal items in tin boxes, hoping someone, someday, would find them and tell their story. In one note, written with frozen hands, an officer wrote, "We are abandoning the ships. All hope is gone. God help us." Those words, preserved for 170 years, are perhaps the most haunting epitaph ever written by a human being. For decades afterward, the Arctic kept its secret. The sea ice moved like shifting glass, burying wreckage one year and uncovering it the next. Each expedition that went looking for Franklin found only fragments. A button, a belt buckle, a bone. The rest remained locked in the deep. But the legend never died. To the British public, Franklin became a symbol, a martyr of empire and endurance. Statues rose in his name. Poems called him the man who ate the north wind and made it bow. But history, as it often does, remembered the hero and forgot the men who died beside him. When the wrecks of Erebus and Terror were finally found in our century, they were not just archaeological discoveries, they were graves. Inside the hulls lay untouched rooms, chairs still upright, maps still pinned to the walls, and teacups resting on tables, as if waiting for men who would never return. The Arctic had preserved their story, but it had also rewritten it. What once was seen as a tale of glory now stood revealed as a warning of human arrogance against nature, of how pride can freeze into tragedy, For more than a century, the Arctic guarded its dead. Beneath those frozen waters lay the final chapter of a story no one truly understood. But time, like the tide, has a way of giving back what it takes. Slowly, silently, and only when it chooses. It was the summer of 2014, when a Canadian search team scanning the Queen Maud Gulf found something unexpected on their sonar screens. A dark shape resting on the seafloor. Its outline unmistakable, a ship, upright, intact, and eerie in its perfection. When divers descended through the icy water, their flashlights revealed an image that sent chills through history itself. There it was, HMS Erebus, the lost heart of Franklin's expedition. Lying still as a tomb, her timbers preserved in the cold silence of 170 years. On the deck, the brass fixtures still gleamed faintly. The ship's bell remained in place, engraved with the date 1845. Even the glass windows of the officer's cabin were unbroken. It felt less like a wreck and more like a ghost that had simply chosen to rest. And as the divers moved inside, they found something that words can barely describe. A pair of boots beside a bed, a dinner plate, a bottle, a spoon lying carefully across the table, as if its owner had stepped out for a moment and never returned. 2 years later, in 2016, the sea gave up its second secret, HMS Terror. It was found 60 miles north of where anyone expected it to be, sitting upright and sealed, as though waiting for its crew to come back. The discovery stunned the world. The cabins were untouched, the wheel still in place, and even the captain's desk sat perfectly preserved. Ink bottles frozen mid-stroke, maps spread out as though time itself had been interrupted. Inside one room, cameras revealed what looked like books and papers, still resting on the shelves, frozen but not destroyed. Pages that might still carry the last words of those who vanished into the snow. Scientists, historians, and Inuit elders came together to study the sites. And it was the Inuit who provided the final piece of truth. Stories passed down through generations, told by those whose ancestors had seen the starving sailors wandering the ice, carrying strange bundles, their faces blackened by frost and despair. For decades, the world had dismissed these tales as myth. But now, with the ships exactly where the Inuit said they would be, it became clear. The truth had always been known, just not to those who refused to listen. It was not technology that solved the Franklin mystery. It was memory, the oral history of a people who had watched, remembered, and kept their truth alive in stories told by the fire. Today, the wrecks of Erebus and Terror are protected sites, silent museums beneath the sea. Divers go down rarely and carefully. Each visit feels like entering a cathedral of ghosts. In the captain's quarters of the Terror, a single window looks out into the dark water. Behind that glass, reflections move, shadows that seem almost human, as if the men of the expedition still walk those halls, waiting for their orders, waiting for the thaw that never came. There is a haunting beauty in their story, not of conquest, but of confrontation. A confrontation between man and nature, between faith and fear, between the desire to explore and the need to survive. Every empire builds its legends, but this one built its own grave. The Franklin expedition reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to walk into the unknown, even when the unknown does not care if you survive. In those final moments, as the ice closed around them, Franklin's men faced the truth that all explorers eventually meet, that nature does not yield to pride. Their story is not one of failure, but of humanity, of men who dared to go where maps ended, and who paid the price for believing that the world could be conquered. And yet, in the silence of that frozen sea, they did achieve something eternal. They became part of the map themselves. The Arctic holds them not as victims, but as markers of human endurance. Frozen symbols of what it means to chase knowledge to the very edge of death. Today, as we look back from the warmth of our screens, we often ask, why did they go? Why risk everything for a passage through a land of death? Maybe it wasn't about glory or empire at all. Maybe it was about that ancient need to know what lies beyond the horizon, to see the unseeable, to name the unnamed, to light a candle in a world of darkness. Even if the wind blows it out, the Arctic remembers them. Not as ghosts, but as whispers carried on the wind, as shapes in the mist, as frozen echoes beneath the ice. Every year, the sea shifts and the wrecks rise and fall with the current, as if breathing, reminding us that history is not dead, only sleeping. Their ships may rest beneath the water, but their story sails on, because as long as we remember them, they are not lost. This has been the Lost Ships of the Arctic, a story of courage, tragedy, and the thin line between discovery and destruction. If these forgotten men moved you, if their courage made you pause for a moment in the rush of modern life, then remember them. And if you believe some stories deserve to be heard, then subscribe to Biography Plus, where the forgotten voices of history still speak, and where every story, no matter how buried, finds its way back to the light.